writing. Her newspaper articles articulate her views on education for areas of research interest include performance studies and cultural history. She has translated from Hindi to English. She writes poetry and poems, appear in several anthologies. She has also a collection of poems titled In Absentia. She is the Vice Chair of the Indian Association for Commonwealth Literature and Language Studies and has been the recipient of several awards. Ma'am, I request you to please say a few words to the audience about the initiatives taken by JDMC for women's empowerment.
Good morning. First and foremost, a warm welcome to our speaker for today, DrJyoti Atwal, and a warm welcome to the teachers and the students, and a big vote of thanks to the Heritage Association for organizing this. We have, as a theme for this particular year, decided that the Center for Gender Parity Studies will look into the issues of widowhood, because we feel that young people need to be sensitized to this issue. We feel that this issue has not been explored enough. Widows exist. We are aware that widows exist. But what do they go through? Should we reach out to them? How do we reach out to them? How do we empower them? What are their rights? Do they have rights? How do they exist in different parts of the country? There's a lot of ignorance regarding this. And so the center has in fact decided that it will take up as a project an ashram at Varanasi, where, I beg your pardon, an ashram at Vrindavan, where it will examine the situation of the widows in that ashram. What are the rights they have? What is the government and non-government organizations doing for them? So this is as far as the center is concerned. We intend to have a whole series of talks. We intend to share a lot of reading material that is available on this topic. But that apart, I did want to share something a little personal. I lost my father the year I turned 18, and my mother has been a widow for the better part of her life. Now, of course, we come from a privileged background in that my father was an army doctor. So she was not economically perhaps impacted. But yes, mentally, she was impacted hugely. Suddenly, a woman who'd been a housewife, whose identity had been so deeply intertwined with her husband, seemed to have lost all identity. And it took almost 5 years. For 5 years, I felt that I hadn't only lost my father, but that in some way I'd also lost my mother, because I didn't recognize her for the person that she'd always been. And since then, I, at least as a person, have been extremely keen that we remain sensitized, we reach out to this group of women who tend to get neglected. Maybe at some other time we should talk about male widows also, because I think they go through hell of a very different order. You know, women busy themselves in different ways, they distract themselves in different ways, but men perhaps are even more neglected. So I'm really grateful, Jyoti, that you have come here today and you're going to address the audience, and I'm sure everybody is all agog to look at the historical perspective to this entire issue of widowhood. So all for Jyoti. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for this inspiring words. Now I would request the teacher in charge of Heritage Association, Dr. Manisha Sharma, to address our speaker, and please welcome.
Good morning, everyone. Today we have amongst us Dr. Jyoti, who will be speaking on the topic Rhetorics of Dissent on Widowhood question in colonial India from Reformist and Feminist perspective. Jyoti Atwal is Associate Professor in History at the Center of Historical Studies, Computer Sciences, JNU, and Visiting Associate Professor from 2022 to 2027 at UCD School of History, University College of Dublin, Ireland. From 2017 to 22, she held positions as adjunct professor at the Department of History, Faculty of Arts, Humanities, and Science, University of Dublin, Ireland. She's received degrees in MA, MPhil, and PhD from JNU and specializes in modern Indian history and post-colonial period with a focus on gender, socio-cultural history, and transnational anti-imperial movements. She has over 20 years of experience in teaching and supervision. She has been a visiting fellow at various universities across the globe. She serves on the editorial board of Women's History Review. She serves on the advisory board of several projects at University College Cork and University College Dublin. She has been invited as a speaker by BBC World Radio and RTP, that is Irish TV, and NPR, Washington DC based national radio. She is a member of an expert committee on the project to launch a women's museum by the Delhi Archives. Her recent publications include a co-edited volume on gender and history, Ireland, published by London Routledge 2022. She has an edited volume on gender and violence in historical and contemporary perspectives situating India, again by Routledge 2022. She has authored Real and Imagined Widows, Gender Relations in Colonial North India by Primus Book 2016. Now, I would like to welcome Dr. Jyoti and Primus. Because Tara has been a long time friend. Our teachers and so we're proud to see you as teachers now. Great, I'm back to this college, and I must tell you, I started my career with this college. I got here briefly, and then I moved on. But this college will always be in my memory, special memories. What I mean is coming here. But I really want to thank Anisha. Thank you very much. Now, thinking of me. Although my work has been on widowhood, but I expanded into other areas over the years. But widowhood, of course, is one subject which lives in an academic way, in a social way, in a reformist way, even with, because when we go to Vrindavan or Banaras, these are the sites, we encounter widows, black and white, and then it reminds you of these women. And of course, cinematic representations can also be very powerful in depicting their status, their roles. I must say, taking on this subject from a historical perspective was rather a challenge because similar data does not exist historically. I created some maps with the help of some geographers to show the geographical distribution of widows, but it wasn't really that useful because I think main questions that are important. Main questions that are important, basically questions of status of widows, the divisions, class and caste, and so it's basically a sociology subject. But how to approach this subject as a historical subject, I thought would be very difficult when I was pursuing my PhD. And PhD is always something which you start with, and then where do you get the material from? So sometimes you become very interested that then you look for material and it doesn't make sense. So I do have some findings which help us understand the social transformation of widows, their status, their moments of dissent. So the question of dissent on the widowed question is the most important question as far as I'm concerned. Because it is from the late 19th century, mid 19th century, in fact, entire 19th century, which was the long 19th century, where you saw social questions being mobilized from, and then ending up with political questions towards the turn of the century. I think that whole century was so important. And it was a long century, so much happened with that. Reform, dissent, Sanatan Dharmis dissented in a big way from the reformers. And there was a churning inside the Hindu society and inside Muslim society as well. And we're still trying to see the intellectual, treat it as an intellectual. But it is not only intellectual, but more. I think it is a history of dissent. Because once you frame the question in a colloquial in the sense that colonial modernity, it changes sense. We can go back to ancient India, we can go back to medieval India. Of course, the widowhood was always contextual in some ways or the other. But what happened in modern India? Why do we need to discuss this modern field? And how is it relevant to the present day? That is how. Those are the questions I'm looking for. So, can we have the next slide, please? Can it become full screen? So when I'm discussing feminists and reformers, let me at the outset say that feminists and reformers were not two different characters, but they often collide. And this is a picture of Ramabai Saraswati, who had got the title in the late century. She stirred the imagination. She still stirs the imagination of the feminists. She has been carved out the only feminist widow of her time. And it is not because she challenged Hinduism. It is also because she was at the receiving end of being a widow of the societal forces that were against her. And we are often told that it is the higher caste women, it is the upper caste women, the Hindu high caste women who received alienation, suppression, oppression, because she was upper caste. So she could not dissent. So therefore, dissent for her was very difficult rather than and lower caste. Right? I do beg to differ from that. That's something which I've challenged to my work, that it is not the case. Many of the lower caste women also had similar. It's just that because the histories of some of the upper caste women have been documented, so we know about them. But many of the cases of the lower caste women who were forced to become such have not been highlighted. So in my work, I have tried to explore the caste dimensions. Although there is so much more work which is to be done in this, I just opened up a road for other people, and I think they can take on from there. But some of my findings I'll share. So this is one of the first feminists we know who wrote the high caste Hindu woman challenging the Hindu faith in several ways, particularly which was primarily came through the ritual representation, a real representation. Of course, you can say she was speaking for herself, speaking for her. That was the only tuning, if any. we are to see the broad range of feminist ideas, well, all of them came from the upper conservative. But why did they dissent? Why did they have to dissent? And it is not only the women, it is also men, as Carl said, that we talk about videos. But I do have one video here who we will talk about, and how he also fasted for the dead wife. For 1 full year, he did not slept on the he didn't sleep on the bed. Instead, he slept on the ground, and he followed all rules of eating once a day and all fast. I am not too sure if that is feminism, but some kind of equality is, interesting to see this happen in 1905. Somebody, and that also from the United Provinces at that time, doing this. So, Pandit Ramabhai Saraswati, sorry, there's too much text on this, but for the educated in Hindu philosophy, Shastras, and the fact that she received the title of Saraswati is very evident that she was gifted with knowledge. So being on that pinnacle of knowledge, still descending is a very interesting phenomenon in colonial India. Can we have the next slide, please? Okay. So this is the continuation of how many languages we could speak and so on. Can we just move on? Because she converted to Christianity, and there are a lot of apprehensions about how she converted. Obviously she was picked by the British officials, British reformers, British associations, and British feminists to show that how Indian women also dissent, could also dissent from their position, and also voice oppression. And very frankly, oppression was not seen as remarriage was not a question. It is a question of tonsure, a question of very strict fasting that came as in the public domain, because these were considered oppressive. Remarriage or no remarriage was, of course, a choice. But I'll come to that, it was also a choice, it was also imposed. As we know, even in the present day, many of the remarriages are imposed. Okay. Next slide. May the next one. Next. Another one. Yeah. So, in about 1829, can I have those, the word file, can I have the word file? So 1820s, I'd like to start from there as to how did the widows come to public notice in the colonial period? They were being talked about, they were being, there was reform, Arthashastra also talks about them. In the medieval period, you know that Akbar tried to stop some women, lure some women from not becoming some. And there are lots of other evidences. And also the sensational orientalizing of women burning themselves, all that is very relevant to us. Can this be enlarged a bit? I just wanted to show you how in the Houses of Parliament, these are the reports that were prepared in 1805, 1810. This is exactly the way in which they were prepared. And we have Lata Mani's work, which is very seminal work. I'm sure how many of you heard of Lata Mani and heard of her when we talk about something. So Lata Mani is the first scholar who talked about the voluntary and the involuntary. Because that distinction was not available earlier. A lot of work on Sati had been done. Datta had a book on Sati, Sharma had a book on Sati. So we have descriptions of Sati and also the legislation on Sati is very well documented. But it is only with Lata Muni's work that we know the problems related to this data collection, interpretation of what's Sati. So I have not changed anything in this. This is exactly how the reporting was done. Houses of Parliament, Houses of Commons. There are 6 volumes which have the cases of Sati. It's huge data. So I have consulted for 1800 to 1820s roughly. There are 6 volumes which figure in the Houses of Parliament and the Houses of Commons. So this was discussed, and it's very obvious that there are 2 forms of Sati in the colonial knowledge come to. One is the Sahamaran, the other is Anumaran. And Sahamaran would be the very suicidal form of death with the burning with the fire of the husband. Right? And the other would be Anumaran. Would be maybe after hearing of the death of the husband, maybe the wife would consider a Sati. Even if she dreamt of his death, it would be a good enough reason to commit Sati. We have such cases before. And I'm not changing anything. This is exactly how it was. That's why I want to bring you the pristine form of reporting in the colonial period. And the age is also listed, the cost of the widow is also there. Who are in Devi. Yes, interesting. Yeah, it is region specific, but at that time Bengal was under discussion because of its huge numbers, 5,000. But at the same time, because under Bengal presidency, there was not northern provinces which was included in that, which is present day UP, parts of present day UP. So Jaunpur, Gorakhpur, all these were part of this Bengal. They fall under that. So I have not said it. I think it's more or less an idea. There was of course Deccan had another data. There was another data that was created for Deccan, which is not something that I've looked at. I've looked at the northern areas and Bengal and so on, which is clubbed together in an administrative way. So the Daroga was asked in 1805 to collect information about who became, if there was any subject. So as we all know, the British had a oriented perception. They had a thing like they also wanted to stop the barbaric practices, and we saw that in infanticide. So see that in other regulations. But somehow this became an eyesore because Sati, first of all, did not happen in the backyard. It was not a personal ceremony. It was a public ceremony where dhols and nagaras were used and it would be made for the consumption of the public eye. So that makes it very different from a ritual. For public consumption, many British officials also stood there, as they would say, to look at these ceremonies, and they could not do anything. So we have Atkinson who actually paints, who was very good sketches of. So when we say what are the evidence, well, 6 volumes are the evidence. There's no doubt about that. There is nothing which was one of the most oppressive forms of ancient, stroke medieval, stroke modern colonial practice in India. So we are not saying that it is a very modern practice in that sense, but the practice of collecting information, knowledge was new. We don't have such data before. So therefore, these parliamentary reports are very, very, they're considered gold, mining gold for feminist studies. But what has happened is Lakanmani has based her work on this. And the word voluntary comes up again and again. That she has volunteered to do this. The woman has volunteered to do this. So we can't stop. There's no way we can stop. And I don't want to go into the 19th century Fort William College where they were trying to find out the evidence as to how. I'm not sure. Most of people are familiar with that practice. Because it will take another lecture to discuss Fort William College and exfoliate this perception of law, Hindu law. But they did employ pundits to reinterpret what is the Hindu law. So, what is the Hindu law aimed at? A universalist perception had to be churned out. Although there wasn't any, there were so many customary laws, as you know. Widows were also allowed to remarry. Given all that, I think early 19th century, what we as feminist scholars gather is the evidence that a woman is also, to me, it was shocking when I read these reports, and it's now very shocking when I read that smoking pipe or with a kamar a woman could commit something. Ages after the husband had died, and she had never seen him die. Just that he didn't come back. So she just chose to. So, given that sense of ambiguity in this perception, I think the British created an archive for us to think about, to read, which did not. And the ages of the widows is also 20, 30, 16 is no age. You would, the present age, why did she actually get married at 16? When we're discussing sexual encounters, we are saying, okay, lower the age of consent. That is a different thing. Consent being different from marriage. So, age of consent, of course, is a very different issue, which will also I come with some of that as well. But the other thing is very important. Because the voluntary and the involuntary distinction really falls down when it comes to child widows, child son. And that is when 9-year-old and 11-year-old girls, kids, children are made to become son. That is the only time when the whole notion of being a family, being in love with the husband, being the better half of the husband, that falls apart. Those are the notions with which the colonial officials lived for a long time. For at least 20 years, they only collect data on sun. For 22 years, they don't do anything. They just ask the rover, please go here, monitor sun. Don't stop. Can't stop, it's a ritual. And the queen has promised that, not this queen, the queen had promised that we will go by the law of the land. We will not disturb you from following your rituals. We promise you that. And interestingly, in 1930, in a property debate, again that in Concept Sanatan Dharma say, look, there is a distinction between Rajaniti and Dharma. And kings and the king, the ruler, even if it is British, Mughal, anybody, they have to, if they can only be accepted if they follow the Dharma. And what is Dharma? Every Hindu will decide what is the Dharma. That is the kind of debate which was embedded to the center in 1930, debate on property, when widows were not allowed to hold it. They were very dissent. That's why I'm using the word dissent. We have both reformers, anti-reformers, so on. Dissent is like, don't believe you. If there is a bill, there is a big dissent. Debate. So 1930. After this is the 1930s. Can we have the next slide? So Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar. Yeah, please keep it with the previous one. Thank you. Previous one. I think there is somebody wanting to admit. Why don't you admit that person into the I know. Exactly. So Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, very well known name and household name. In fact, children also know their from the textbook. What is it that he did? You know, we can blame him for two things. We can praise him for something. We can praise him for actually finding something in the Parasar Samhita which would allow a widow to remarry. Because whenever the British, whenever anything is went to the legislative council, whenever a bill was floated by the Hindus, it needed a backing of the Shastras. It could not go without backing because the British were at all times, they were reminded of their council that we will rule by the book. We will go by the book of which belongs to Hindus. In case of Muslims, which belongs to Muslims, or in third thing was customary laws. So three kinds of courts came up in India. One which believed that there could be law which could be interpreted and everything could be decided by the Shastras, Samhitas. The other was the interpretation that everything could be decided by the non-religious or Anglo-Indian law. Third would be the idea that there was some norms which were customary. And in this case, Allahabad High Court took the position that there are some customary laws also which need to be kept in mind. That it's not always that widows were not allowed to remarry. Now, what Vidyasagar did, this passage. He used several passages, but only one or two are, I'm reading to you only one or two important ones. That what happened in the Kali, he divided his interpretation of time into Kali Yuga, and that was also the perception in the Hindu text. It was nothing new. But he said, this is Kali where we are living. And in this Kali Yuga, it is very difficult for the Hindu widows to observe cases. Women would not be able to do that. So what do you do? Well, he said Parasar in the first instance has prescribed remarriage. But yes, that women should be remarried. And this has to be clearly understood that any woman who wants to remarry should be allowed to remarry. But then he also said there are four different distinctions between who will remarry and who will not remarry. He took up the question of caste. He said a Brahmin widow has to wait for the maximum. The Kshatriya widow should wait for a lesser time. Then Vaishya widow should wait for even a lesser time. And the Shudra widow should probably wait for a few days.
remarriage. And he said nothing about the untouched women, because they were not part of his scheme. Right? They didn't figure in the scheme, and he didn't bother about it. So there is this doing these interpretations, there were some problems which emerged. And then the notion of time was very important. I think the cyclical notion of time was so different from the European time. Right? So he counterposed the European time with this. Can we go to the next one? In reality, when the Hindu widows remarriage bill was passed, 51 petitions were presented in relation to the bill, out of which 23 were signed by 5,001, which were in favor of proposing remarriage. But 51,746 petitions, the persons signed in negative against the law. But yes, it was passed. The British went with the 5,176 people's signature. And the signatures are kept in the National Archive. Whenever I go there, I check to see those signatures. All over the British. Interestingly, these signatures have obviously had, that means there was no question of majority, minority, there's no voting with. The British went with, the colonial state went with what was feasible and correct. They thought that since the bill had emerged from a Hindu himself, and that also which Vidyasagar was a Brahmin, and in the earlier case, the bill had not emerged from Reformist. It was a colonial benevolence, the idea that we would be able to stop some kind of barbaric practice. And it was a more difficult task to do, to stop such, rather than to permit remarriage. That was the notion of the British. So some of the works that have come out in the past, some of the, these are very old books, but I think they have really made a mark, and anybody who wishes to do some research has to go through this. P.C. Joshi edited book came out in 1971, which was a Marxist take on Ramon Roy, saying, well, he is only speaking for his own class, he's not speaking for everyone. So this was a very good sound chief, but obviously for feminist history, this is the watershed. And then Charles Hempstead's book in 1964 has carved out the way of understanding how Indian nationalism built or stood on Hindu social reform, and how Hindu social reform went hand in hand with this nationalism. Then Panikkar's book again is a very good cultural Marxist take on the whole issue, and I still consider these three books as very iconic. Can we have the next slide, please? This is the basic distinction between sati abolition and widow remarriage. That from the day it was passed, every Hindu, whatever his feelings might be, was compelled to obey the sati and the sati ban, because it also meant punishment. But in case of Widow Remarriage Act, nobody was punished. It was an enabling act. It was not a compulsory act. If the widow wanted, she could remarry. It was permissive. Well, okay, but you can very well imagine in 1856, which widow would actually use this law to say, I want to remarry. She would prefer eloping with somebody she likes, rather than invoke So the British knew very well that, the official circles, it was a very good knowledge that these two acts differ in their nature. Can we, the next one? Oh. So this is another book about campaign and popularity. Ishwarchandra Vidyasagar's campaign did become popular despite its problems. And there was an act that was passed, and 1856 Act had a lot of problems. Although it was a very remarkable step, it was a very progressive act to permit widows to remarry. Although it permitted the widows to remarry, it also put some riders on when it could remarry and not remarry. Number one, it debarred the remarried widow from holding any share in the dead husband's property. Just debarred her from everything, whether it was a joint property and also the notion of freedom, only existed when you were rich. In case of poorer family, it doesn't really matter. There's nothing to pass on. But it was in the case of upper caste widows, property widows, land holding widows, that doesn't matter, that they had to pay for. And in late 19th century, lawyers like Colonial, she comes up and she fights so many cases of these Parda machine women who are debarred from property under the act, who do not have this, but to forego the property, and property is huge. But there's always an urge to debar them. So this, one has to understand that what kind of debates that went on in the 1930s, 1920s, in favor of the widow, despite the fact that they were enabling, pushing an argument for her property right. So, and also I just mentioned a while ago, talked about one person which I have just who was a male feminist. I would call such people male feminists, who teach people equality in the early 20th century. So this is one case of a journal producer editor of Abla Hikara. Abla Hikara was started in early 1905 by somebody called Shankar, and he was, in UP. And he ordered a copy of Vidyasagar's book on widow remarriage. It was in Bengal. Although I don't know why he ordered it. Really? It had already been published as a pamphlet in English for the court. But he ordered the full book. He wanted to read the book, not just the pamphlet. So, because he couldn't read Bengali, he started reading Bengali in order to understand. So there was a wide appeal which under Vidyasagar had. Now one must understand that this appeal is not a feminist appeal. It differs. It's not basically reform. What is very thin line between what is feminist and that one reform. So he tries to live like a widow for almost a year. And he talks about his own experience, what he does, where he goes. He doesn't attend any weddings or any auspicious occasion for one. Now, it does not mean that by becoming equal, he has challenged the custom because he's following that. He's not challenging. Right? He's following that. So Shankar Lal is a very good example who is totally overawed with this Vidyasagar kind of reform. So this is something we might want to look at some more cases of these kinds. I'm sure there are more cases. Next slide, please. Okay. Can you please? This is about Shankar Lal again. He started the journal, and then he invited the Sanatan Dharmis who opposed widow remarriage for a debate. And this culture was then termed as Shastra. And he would announce a reward for anybody who wanted to start Shastra with him. And he would give them the reward. And most of the time, he was also abused in many of these meetings. And we know that even Ishwar Chandra Vidyasabha was abused, stoned, because he had violated Shastras. Although it was, even if the Shastras had permitted, it was not permitted, it's not accepted by the society, the remarriage, because that would open up for many different things. Next slide, please. So this is the time and the yuga which I had already spoken. Can I have the next slide, please? Next, please. So basically, what I have done in my own research is look at the dying Sati and the living Sati. To me, the dying Sati was the actual Sati who was perished with the husband or with his object, his pipe, his wallet, his or anything after this. And very, very good. But what is a living Sati? Living Sati is somebody who is embodiment of that dead Sati. She is not supposed to live like a living being. So sexual abstinence is a very important factor. Even after the widows were allowed to remarry, even after 19th century reforms were instituted, the expectation that there will be a living Sati lives on. And even if you see cinema, in many of the Nirupama Roy, Amitabh mother, most of them. She's somebody who's only seen in the temple. She's either blind, suffering. I mean, the widow is constantly suffering in Indian cinema. And the younger ones are always an object of suspicion. For example, you look at Sholay. What happens in Sholay? Anybody wants to? Any student who wants to see Sholay? You know the widow in that movie, right? What does she do? What is her role? Sorry, could you be a No, not only marriage. You see, again, the problem is marriage. Problem is abstinence. Seclusion from life and pleasure. That is what is the most important. Marriage, you don't know, marriage may be very unhappy or. But on the one hand, when you see the Minder and Hemaman in Holy, there's a holy song there, right? In which is seen as, they're very immorals and they're love song, they're jumping around. But at the same time, this woman is never part of that song. She's not even remotely that song, part of that song, or any song. Whenever she comes on the screen, there is a defiance. Being looking at a man. She doesn't even look at any man properly. These are images which are reproduced by Indian cinema. Right? Cinema is a very powerful tool. A very powerful tool. I think it captures imagination. Who is a widow? Well, many people will go and say, oh yes, this is natural. Obviously, a widow can't. If he was shown in that song, it could have been unrealistic. Right? We could have for a widow to be dancing, coloring herself. In fact, in water, I'm sure you've seen water, where 3-4 different types of widows are shown. And these widows are actually made to, these widows have different lives. The younger one who's a child, has to be rescued, because she will also become prostitute, fall into the hands of the national owner. So the nationalists take her and put her in safe custody. So her safety is the first. While for the younger one, it is a question of remarriage. For the older one, it is a question of hope, whether she will acquire. She just wants to eat a laddu, she just wants to play holy, tired. There's a movie is about it. It's not about marriage. So widowhood has moved on from the rhetoric of simply talking about remarriage or talking about more, whether there is accessibility to that kind of pleasure and other kinds of life which normal people live. Right? So, okay, my other contention was that there is that widows also fall in. Sure. That historiography in the West has also has talked about leaky bodies. Now, what are leaky bodies? See, women's bodies have been under suspicion from the very beginning. There is Sherlock's theory about nature versus culture, where men are all about culture. The culture is constituted by men, whereas nature, women constitute only nature, because they're overpowered by nature, right? So that sort of thing is very much seen in the Indian history of reform when we discuss menstruation of women, what age they should reproduce. In fact, whole of 19th century was full of discussion about women's menstruation. At what age we should reproduce, if they should reproduce or not. And much of this discussion happened minus women. It happened in the male domain. It is only very late that women talk about will come addressing the age of consent. Age of consent, I think, is a much more important question here, which was linked to the question of widows. It was supposed to sort out the question of the widows. So, leaky bodies, a theory which I often apply to understanding of women in 19th century, where there's some explosions that are passed on women all the time. But you just go and become unchaste. The property discussion would say that why do you want to be property? But when I started somebody in 1930s who talks about giving property share to widows, then it is immediately rejected, thrown out of the window immediately in the legislature. Then he said, okay, not share in the property, let's do a maintenance grant or something like that. Maybe to maintain. I have looked at some cases, but he's a hardcore feminist because he is the first person who does not depend on the Shastras for arguing in favor of property share of women. He turns the argument into a secular domain. That is why. So I am still working on Viras Sharda. I think he's one of the basic person of his period, and also he was trained in the colonial law. He had dealt with the magistrates, and at the same time he had looked into the Hindu Reformist League. He was part of Arya Samaj. So there are lots of things which were happening, and there was an urge to take this whole debate out of the Shastric domain into a more secularized domain, where there would be no need for sanctioning from the Shastra. I think that is the most important. Where can we go to the next one? So the movement from rights to rights from 1856 to 1957 is very clear that there is a movement outward towards a more secularized of rights. Although the word right is of course not acceptable to people because Sanatan Dharmis and various other Sanatan are not only a group, It is also the members of the bar in Allahabad and other places who say no, we cannot. We cannot give the widows any property rights. The first and the foremost reason for not giving them any property is that they believe that Hindu households take very good care of their widows. They're very nice, they're very careful. Now that must be experiential in some ways, but at the same time, we cannot deny the fact that many of the widows were debarred and lived in the almost starvation stage. And this was also an evidence that Harvila Shakta had collected from 4 presidencies. He was talking on the basis of some data. And that is why it became very impossible for the others to deny. Then the question of Rajniti versus Dharmaniti came in the legislative domain. I'm not going into this, whatever I'm talking is from the legislative debates, which surfaced during this. And different kinds of problems arise, one in adoption, one in share for the marriage of the girl, and the other is upbringing of children and so on. So the widow had to forego, according to 1856 Act, any interest in the husband's property. So that was the biggest loss. Now, the most interesting thing that happened can be termed the more please, because we are very time. Yeah. The last. Sorry, these are like just compared to all but further, please. Further on. Further on. Yeah, further, please. Further. Further. Yes. Yes. These are very interesting images. I'll come to them in just a minute. But before I do that, the most important argument in favor of denying these widows any share was that it was, what if tomorrow, as long as they're widows, we give them share, but what if she remarries? Or what if she doesn't remarry? She just becomes unfixed to Gola, sullies the bed of her lord. These are the terms that are used in the legislative council. What if she sullies the bed of her lord? Would it be fair then on part of the family to part with the wealth? So she's always an object of suspicion. And based on that suspicion, she should never be given. Instead, she would only be maintained, and maintenance means maybe 2 meals a day or 1 meal a day. She should always be dependent on the relatives of the husband, of the deceased husband, for any maintenance. So, right to property did not was so difficult to involve in that sense. There were legal problems, there were religious problems, there were functional problems, and the debates which exist clearly tell us that. But Abhilash Thakur, I think his response was a
Just wait for 2 minutes. I guess.
Should I continue?
just keep talking? Is it okay?
Yeah, I'm recording here, so yes.
Okay, yeah. Harbila Sharda is somebody who says that what if the same thing a man does? The man can also remarry the next day, can also sully the bed of the wife. I am amazed at the kind of feminist arguments he uses. This is about equality, a sexual equality. I think that's amazing to have that kind of rhetoric in that period. To dissent from, a larger, set of Hindu conservatives and who had a real voice at that point of time, especially regarding these issues. I think that remains an important issue. But however, we are not only talking about the problem arose when it was the widows in Punjab for whom the colonial state did not decide. They said, well, we will leave it to the custom. We will not implement any law. It is customary. Now, can anybody guess why the widows in Punjab were left out of the domain of colonial law? Anybody? Take a wild guess. Why were they left?
Punjab was, there's presence of Muslims and Sikhs. So that's a different.
Is a what?
Muslims and Sikhism, different traditions. Also, they had local traditions, they show in that movie Ek Chadar Maili Si, where there was practices of widow remarriage continued till much later on.
Well, those are things which might have surfaced, but the main reason was from Punjab there was mass recruitment in the army. So army became important, and Sikhs and and we know the theory of the martial race which the British promoted at that point of time, because they used to measure height, color, strength, bones, how many inches are you, chest is. So the others didn't fare that well, so they believed that the British and the race in the northwestern provinces was similar to the Aryan race. Okay, so they dished out these theories about the race, and then they recruited the people from Punjab who were more likely to be resembling Pathans, strongly built, tall, who could endure the extreme heat, extreme cold, and can survive. So the soldiering, they were perfect for soldiering in that sense, and they were recruited. And there was a test that they had to pass. So when British Army constituted substantial numbers from this area, there were demands that now you cannot touch their customary laws, because you have army which comes from that. This is what Prem Chaudhary has also talked about. She's talked about this, that the army is a major factor here. And as I said, there are three kinds of laws operating all over India: Dayabhaga, Mitaksha, and customary. So the courts went with more or less these loosely defined terms. It is very difficult to pin down as to what, but it is very clear that after the First World War, there are demands for pension in the army. And those demands continue till the beginning of the Second World War. And this is the interwar period in which many amendments take place. One is 1920s, there is a demand for pension, and this pension mostly in the form of, actually the Indian soldiers were not given pensions, they were given allowances. In the First World War, the soldiers were promised their family would be given separation allowances. They would be, if they are separating for so and so, just give me 2 minutes. Yeah, 2 minutes. So this is one region where a special report goes from here saying that what do we do about this? Many of these soldiers are demanding that their pension, because if they die while fighting for the British, which they did many a times, or get crippled, and then, or maybe injured or whatever for life, what happens to their wives? In most of the cases in Punjab and in many other parts of India, but as I said, Punjab was special for the British because the recruitment of the army was done from there. So many of them said, look, these people, many of them,
We'll continue. I don't know when that starts, but we'll finish over.
so many of these people who were recruited, soldiers who were recruited, way back home in present-day Haryana and Punjab, the widows had a right to marry in the customary way. They would usually be married off to the younger brother of the deceased. And then in that case, the property would remain inside, whatever land, whatever agriculture. But pension-wise, it was decided that since these pensions were basically the pension which the widow was given, was used to maintain the same mother, which that husband would have done. You know, so until and unless that customary law was followed, we are happy with it. No, we don't touch these people. It's all right. It's permitted. Punjab was a very strict. They never had to jostle with any of this property, and it was only in northern India, other parts of India, in Bengal, particularly south, that they had to battle this. In 1937 Property Act made a real difference to these women. And the pictures I showed you there were, was an interruption of the image of the widow. She was also being constituted as a mother goddess, as a mother, who was woven into the secular domain of Mother India. Okay, that was different. I will not go into that because Tara wants me to finish in 2 minutes, which I will. Okay. So, all over, there is no, just to conclude, there is no one trajectory which this widow question follows. One is the legal domain, which I discussed, which was the most difficult domain, most challenging domain, where all kinds of patriarchal, masculine discourses come up. The other is the widow, pension widow, that takes us to the notion of what widows and so on, which of course is a topic for maybe a different lecture. But thank you very much for listening to me.
Thanks a lot. Jyoti, I've been wanting to listen to her research for a while now, and I have a book and I yet haven't had the opportunity to read it. You presented before us, some data from this point in history, which is of course, all points in history are significant, but this particular point also of change. But then each point is point of change. And this whole trajectory of the question of remarriage, widowhood, it's something that also we take it up in ancient. I guess the medievalists are also doing it, I'm not aware of. Yeah. So, there is definite evidence in the texts. We have the Shafic tradition, the Kam Shastra, the Artha Shastra, and the Dharma Shastra. All three show, evidence of widow remarriage, punarvod. And then we have, then the Sati starts, in the ancient period, Satahan, early references. There's so many interconnected things, for example, the practices of ritual suicide, right? Questions of chastity, which, moving from the earlier liberal Dharma tradition, we go on to increasing emphasis on restraint and chastity as a general lifestyle for even householders. Somehow I don't know, it's all very embroiled in these questions of, following that chaste lifestyle within marriage, even for women. The notion of the pativrata exists within marriage also as a chaste woman. So it's really extremely complicated at what point this change comes, but really what you brought out with this data is that modern phase. So questions, students really, we've lost that Zoom connection. But the students who are here and even the teachers, we would welcome any questions from you.
Converted into Christianity. So, why was that? What is the only way to escape the rituals of widowhood in Hinduism during the period of the study? Yes. Pandita Ramabai converted to Christianity. So, why was that? Was it the only way to escape the rituals of widowhood in Hinduism during the 19th century?
It's a very good question. Thanks.
You can answer one by
Well, it is one of the ways of escaping. It's not the only way. Because we have several other widows, Parvati Athabale from Maharashtra, from Pune. Then we have Ramabai Ranade later on. And there are several others who take up the position that they will do social welfare. In fact, there is a great opposition to remarriage as well, which of course I could not bring out because of the paucity of time. But there is a great opposition. Many of these women who turn nationalists, they say, well, we want to serve the nation. Why do you want us to remarry? What is the problem? I'm out of work now, more free to do things. Follow my agenda. Why do you want me to leave? So this is something, this is one of the ways. But the fact that she converted and she had a very scathing critique of widowhood. That is why she's been held as one of the major leaders against widowhood. The other one would be Tarabai Shinde. You may be familiar with her. She's also a very important name in this field, and she writes about equality between men and women. So she also frames the things in a similar way. But the fact that this person converts, she gets a lot of support from the West, a lot of money and funding and support from the West because she's converted, and then she remarries. So you have to understand the various ways of converting, and because she's not gone, she's converted doesn't make her less feminist, right? So I think that factor, that operational factor here is not conversion. Conversion, in fact, draws a lot of flack from the other people. That she's converted, so now she's no longer even Hindu. What is she craving about? What does she want? She should be thrown out of the. So that sort of thing was also going on. But good question.
Yeah, I just want to know one thing, that when the age of consent very controversy came about, when the age of consent very controversy came about, that is the moment that we realize that many historians argue that reform actually lapses into what we call revivalist century, this is in the 80s and 90s. And this whole argument that the Raj or the
Pass the mic. I don't think we just pass that mic. Others later. Some students just handle this mic.
Yes, what I'm saying is that when the age of controversy came in 1890s, in the backdrop of dogma violence, and that is the moment when reform lapses into revivalism. One argument is that. the argument was that the family itself, the tradition, is the last preserve. As you said that in the 1930s, this Rajniti and Arniti had difference. Now, my argument is that that is also the moment when national struggle starts. How these debates went on to actually affect and contribute to the making of the national consciousness, the way the national movement was organized. Do you see any kind of contribution that the social religious reform of the whole? Because if you may recall that Rukumabad was forced to withdraw her case and reach a compromise. This is 1880s. And by that time, because our reform had taken shut back and come into existence, we see a foolish reform, something like reform, all of that had already unfolded. So this moment where the personal speaks, but 50 years down the line, the same debate. So my argument essentially is that we will see this debate playing on to reform lapsing into revivalism by late 19th century.
I don't really, long ago, I stopped looking at reform versus revival scheme. Because the 1950s, Hindu board bill, the way it unfolded. I think it's a redundant debate about what collapsed from reforms into revivalism, especially when it concerns feminist history, feminist scholarship, feminism in India. Because there are moments of feminism. We don't have a sustained movement as in the West. We have evolved through movements, not movements. So that is the problem that we are faced with. We don't have a sustained idea of what is going to be. There is a pause, the present Hibiscus case, St. Principal case, Atras, do we have any rhetoric? Have we evolved? Do you see women's groups coming up? No. We don't have a movement. So I don't know reform versus revival. When was reforms, when did reform end and when did revival begin? I think both of them have always dominated the society. Even we are going through the revivalist age, even today. When we accept British government, when we accept so many other things. So from a feminist perspective, the historic also, I feel end of the 19th century was one period when we don't really, in the National Social Conference, I think which happened in 1890s, which used to happen after the Indian National Congress meeting, that used to take up all the social questions. They stopped it in 1900 under Chandavarkar and others because it was not, because the social reform was so very large and it was not possible for the political rhetoric to engage with it. Someone had half problem somewhere, there is a problem of down south there is a problem of blouse. Cloth controversy was there. Then there is a problem of matrimony. And there is this root which is so difficult. And caste reform actually went back to caste more than reform or revival. There were Agarwal Sabhas, there were this Sabhas, that Sabhas, and they just got absorbed into that. And for some time they managed, because you see the mushrooming of the women's journals and social reform journals after 1900. They, even in this example which I gave, the widow remarriage could not be remarriage by choice. If you just like anybody fall in love, it didn't mean that. It meant Kanya, God Kanya, who was widow, will be finding the God unity. And that would be the match. Outside that, there cannot be a I really have stopped thinking about reform versus revival in the Indian sense. Makes no sense. Maybe European, you are expert in the Europeans. This is the problem with those who are studying European, there is absolutely no scope of reproducing these.
So actually, I remember this dialogue which that Fox refers to, that Sarojini Naidu had with Mahatma Gandhi. And when Mahatma Gandhi said that I represent the nation, Sarojini Naidu disagreed and said that Mahatma, you do not represent the nation. And she was arguing from a feminist point of view. Because the Victorian representations which you showed, the first image of Bharat Mata that we get is by Subramanian Bharat. And then we have Tagore representing Bharat Mata. So, I was wondering that why should in that image of Bharat Mata, because Bharat Mata is holding in her hands benediction, prosperity, and all of that, because Subramanian Bharati's representation is different than Tagore and in the later. Why should veto be led in that position? Why should not the idea of the mother as representative of the nation? Because to draw a parallel here, I'll draw a parallel from the Soviet experience. When the Second World War unfolded, and when that famous battle of Stalingrad, the city named on Stalin, and that was the turning point of the battle, pushback of Germany. There you see even today, Mother Russia's statue standing, which is now renamed, is called Volgograd. And Mother Russia's huge statue is standing where Mother Russia is invoking the people and invoking the soul. So the image of the motherland, even the Soviets had to basically rely on that. So what needs to basically read the widow in the Bharat Mata?
Yeah, I have, thanks Janki, that's right. I have already read with this mother and the widow being synonymous in many cases. Because this widow is always a single woman. Mother India, the widow comes across as a single woman. I mean the movie, Mother India. Her husband disappears and the husband has to disappear because otherwise the movie cannot be the theme. I think the difference between the Soviet model and the Indian model is this, that there, you do not have this kind of oppression, this oppression of the land through which the Mother India is created in India. This is Nehruvian Mother India, Gandhian Mother India. In 1930s, Gandhi, he goes around and he said, he hears the slogan, Bharat Mata Ki Jai. And he says, I don't know, what is this Bharat Mata Ki Jai? What is Bharat Mata? Ki Jai bolte. So he asks people, and what have I done? And everybody says, Bharat Mata is mitti, this land which we are killing. So he said, no, Bharat Mata is, you have constituted Bharat Mata inside you. No, that is his reply to that. It's not about whether they have done it or not. He understands as something that they have done, they have constituted that Bharat. Bharat Mata doesn't exist. That Rashtriya, who's that painter at the end of the turn of the century, the one famous for, where Bankim Chandra, he imagines that Mother India, the saffron-clad Mother India. That image of Mother India, very simple. But she becomes decked with jewelry and she becomes very, after some time she does that. When the more radical movements take off, when there is full-scale nationalistic campaigning, and Gandhi really doesn't have an imagination of Mother India. He doesn't. But he has widows at the center of reform. So many of these Devdasis also contribute to this campaign. He draws from such a wide variety. So that is one thing which I think is distinguishes the Russian, because that is based entirely on the labor and borrows from the ancient Greece and Roman goddesses of legality, of balance, justice, etc. Only legalize, go to the legal domain. This one is constituted the land, our property.
There's another event, so we'll continue with the discussions over tea, all of us, and Madhvi.
Thank you, Professor Atwal. Thank you for being with us and enlightening us with your very interesting and informative talk. What we have learned about, whenever we talked about social reform, we just talked about the reform or the orthodox. But the way you have started, we heard about the feminists. We started with Ramaban, and then we moved on to the reformers. And then Dyson, which was very beautifully placed in your talk. And we always raised this question, where are the voices of the women? They were always presented by the men or by the state. So it's really fascinating. You talk about many things today, and I think that because of the paucity of time, we could not move on. There are many questions, many topics, many themes which are still, I think, we need to discuss and we need to talk about them. As you talked about the movies, I remember a movie in which Neela was set, and the movie called The Last Color. She's the widow in that movie. And the comparison is here with the untouchables. Untouchables and the widow. How, what was their experience as being a member of the society. So there are many other questions which is now we need to explore, and your talk is very fit into it. So thank you very much. I would like to thank all the audience here and our IQAC and Tarashman, the association in charge. I would also like to thank for joining us online and thank you. Thanks a lot.